we're also going to get an opinion now from Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who joins us from FICCI. Of course, the implications of the Satyam fallout, not just for Satyam as a company, but also for India Inc. per se. Rajiv, afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. Your initial reactions to a news that has shocked not just the markets, but India Inc.
Well, I think the reaction is what everybody else is responding with, which is disbelief. I mean, we are clearly shocked. This is a reputed company. This is not a small company. This is a franchise company, and a lot of what India has been marketing itself as was on the back of companies such as Satyam. So I think this is shock, and this in the short term will have a dampening effect on the general reputation of India Inc.
Has accepted responsibility, Rajiv. This is also a systemic failure. So in your own view, which are the parts of the system that failed to function for this fraud to be perpetrated, and perpetrated at such a large scale?
No, I think there are clearly, and I think those are the questions that need to be asked today, which is what went wrong systemically. I think the auditors need to answer, because this happened on their watch. The independent directors need to answer, but this happened on their watch. And the regulator needs to, in some ways, examine this issue and ensure that there is not more of this going around in the system. So I think what you said is absolutely right. The questions that need to be asked today are the systemic questions, the whole of the system. And those consist of, like I said, the auditors, the independent directors, and the regulator.
Rajiv, you also raised that extremely important point about the fact that Satyam was a flag bearer for India Inc. within the international community, not just amongst its clients, but also within the international investor community. How large is the fallout of this going to be now on the rest of India Inc.?
No, I think, look, anytime there is bad news like this, it is going to be, one brush paints all kinds of bad news. There is all of India Inc. will come under some sort of a cloud and question, not that it's justifiable. But the only way to solve that is for the regulator and the government to go out into the market as quickly as possible over the next 1 or 2 months and say this is an isolated incident. Unless we can establish that this was isolated and unique and just one, we will continue to have the overhang of suspicion over India Inc. India Inc. and the government and the regulator must work to establish that this is an exception rather than a general rule.
Rajiv, I think that's a very important question you raised, Rahul here, and I think that's the pertinent question about the independent directors of the company, and that's the point I was making when I was speaking to my colleagues a little while back as well, that did they actually have a know-how of this, and is that why they preempted their resignation perhaps before this saga, if you will, sort of unfolded? What's your own sense? While there could be criminal procedures launched both domestically as well as internationally on the promoter of the company right now, do you think that the independent directors could also come under the line of criminal fire from here on? And the other point, of course, I want to raise is, while you say that this could probably be a blemish on the entire corporate India's governance, could this and a few select cases be enough to just paint a brush across the entire corporate India sentiment at this point, do you think?
Let me answer the first one. I think the issue of independent directors and what their role is will only become obvious after somebody examines the depth of their knowledge and culpability. I think it's dangerous to currently pass a judgment on what they knew and how they conducted themselves. That is why I always say that independent directors is not enough to be independent, but you also have to have independent directors who are capable to understand what the management is doing around them. So it could be that the kindest explanation is that the independent directors just went to sleep on their watch and they did not know what was going on. That's the kind of explanation, and I think investigation will prove the depth of their understanding and knowledge of the facts. On the other issue, I think it's like this. I think when you have a company like Satyam, if this was some other company, I wouldn't say this. When you have a company like Satyam that was in a lot of ways the flag bearer of India's economic reforms, liberalization, the IT industry and so on, it is difficult for an investor in New York and Wisconsin and Los Angeles and London to start differentiating between a Satyam and an A or a B or a C. So in the short term, there will be this effect of having one brush starring, most companies. And that is something we must accept. And we must work to establishing that this is unique, this is an exception other than the general rule. And that can only be done by regulators and the government going out there post some sort of an analysis and confirming that fact to their
Actually, what scares me about what you said, Rajiv, is predominantly what I think may have happened in this case, that the independent directors probably went to sleep on their watch. Because to actually explain a transaction like Meta's, which none of the independent directors took the time and effort to actually come out, they chose resignation as the easy way out. Do you think that voting rights and the way they're actually used by the independent directors also needs to come under question? Forget the ramifications of what this transaction may have to do with in terms of criminal charges, etc. But just simply the way the voting rights are cast and on such sensitive issues that in this case stem from two promoter-held companies, does that need a very, very severe relook and the legal implications that surround voting rights, you think?
No, I think, Rahul, the solution is far simpler than tinkering with that. I don't know, maybe that's another solution, but what I would think the solution is that when we have independent directors, it's not enough for them just to be independent. Different forms of business need different kinds of independent directors. Because at the end of the day, the independent director must have the capacity to understand the business and what is going on in the business. Being independent is not in itself an acceptable enough virtue. I mean, just because I have no relationship with a promoter that I can be on the board of a company that does derivatives business may not make sense anymore. You need to have a director who's independent, but at the same time understand the underlying business and the numbers and the accounts, when they are placed in front of them. So the capability of an independent director is an area that we need to be focusing on as much as his independence as well.
All right, so we're coming in from Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Before we let you go, Rajiv, one very quick question. We've been talking about the liability of the fraud for the board members, including the independent directors. Do you think there could be any fallout of the current news on employees of Satyam, especially those that function within the finance function? I'm talking about the CFO in particular.
I frankly don't have knowledge enough to comment on that. I just think that it will shatter a lot of people in Satyam who worked very hard and long to build the company, and it clearly, as somebody who has no interest in the company of any sort, I am shattered today as President Ficky and a Member of Parliament. So I imagine what people in Satyam are going through.
Sure, shattering indeed, and one can't help but think of the employees at Satyam. That's a view coming in from Rajiv Chandrasekhar of Ficky. Thanks so much for joining us. 72% down now on the Satyam stock, trading at 50 rupees and 80 paisa. It's recovered 80 paisa from the level at which two block deals totaling to 11 lakh shares have come into play on Satyam in the NSE. Hand you now to my colleague Arun Giri, who's in conversation